Hey everyone, and welcome to Chef AJ Live. I'm your host, Chef AJ, and this is where I introduce you to amazing people like you who are doing great things in the world that I think you should know about. My guests today are very popular features on Chef AJ Live. They try to come on at least once a month when they're available. They are the dynamic duo, the co-stars of the Beat Your Genes podcast, which airs Wednesday night at 8:30 p.m. Pacific time on iTunes, Blog Talk Radio, lots of places actually. And they're writing a long-awaited book together. I hear there's a title in the works, but we're not allowed to know it yet, but hopefully that'll come out very soon. And they have a wonderful website, esteemdynamics.com, where for the cost of a cup of coffee, you can become a member and get privy to exclusive content and Q&As. Please welcome them to the show, Dr. Doug Lisle and Dr. Jen Howk. It's always great to see you guys.
Yeah, it's great to be here. How are you?
I'm good. You're so nice, Jen. I mean, Dr. Hawk, sorry.
No, Jen is fine.
Okay, well, I try to, because I call Dr. Lisle Doug in real life, but I feel like, when you got the doctor to.
No. It's all good.
Okay. Sometimes we call him DDL, though. That's like his acronym, Doctor.
I know. I call him that. If I have to make a note in my calendar, that's how I always represent DDL.
Yep. How are you today, Dr. Lisle?
Good. All's well.
Great. Well, so we have some questions, actually 8 that have been submitted in advance. And, if you're watching live and you have a question, know that both of these fine doctors do private consultations, but we do give preference to people that took the time to write it out in advance. So we have a variety of topics, but I'll start with this one. And I didn't get the lady's permission to say her name, so it's better to say anonymous and then, then not. So she says, my question is around dating while eating a whole food plant-based diet. I'm 5'5" tall and 125 pounds. So my weight is not a problem. And it's easy to get dates using the swipey apps. However, eating out is far from ideal. I have to try to plan around the dinner. And if I eat sufficiently beforehand, my stomach sticks out and looking knocked up is not going to attract any high quality mates. If I try to eat after the date, it tends to be really late and now vegetables aren't as appetizing. I'm trying to go on 2 to 3 dinner dates per week, and this is messing with me both mentally and from maintaining compliance on this program. Luckily, the following day, I bounce back and stick to the food plan, so I haven't put weight on under these circumstances in the past couple months, but the whole process is stressful, and I'd appreciate any advice so I don't die alone.
The stakes are probably not that high. Yeah, I don't know who wants to take this one, Doug.
Oh yeah, Jen.
Yeah, I can say a couple of things. We can both jump in probably. I would say this sounds like somebody who listens to us regularly. There are a couple of cues in this question that I have a hint that this is somebody who knows us, and so kind of familiar with a lot of what we talk about. And one of the rules here, it sort of depends on what you're up to, what your dating agenda is. So if you're looking for a pair bond, I don't think there's any great harm in flying your freak flag early and often with this kind of thing. And so if you're going to go out to dinner with this person and you're considering them for a serious pair bond, go ahead and signal that you're a little bit of a weirdo when it comes to your dietary preferences, and you're going to do the best you can at the restaurant, and you haven't had anything to eat beforehand, or you didn't eat so much that you're feeling unattractive when you go out. That's a whole other separate situation. We can tackle that separately. But I would just go in hungry, ready to have dinner on a date, and do the best you can with what's available on that menu. And if that requires a little bit of a conversation, like, hey, by the way, I'm sort of a weirdo and I eat a little abnormally, so I'm going to make some demands on this menu here. And he can't deal with it, too bad. He doesn't qualify for pair bond anyway. If you're seeking casual mating, the strategy is a little bit different. And we could talk about that, but I don't get the sense that that's what's going on. I think it's really just about coming to terms with making your requirements clear pretty early in the process is going to save you a lot of heartache and a lot of trouble. And if it's too much for him, then he's not enough man for you. Is sort of where I would come down on that.
Nice.
Yeah.
I can't imagine, like, at this stage in my life, if I had to deal with that with my diet the way it is. I just don't. I was just a junk food vegan when I was dating, and that nobody cared about that.
Yeah, I mean, I found in my own experience with this that you're going to have huge individual variation with how they respond, and it actually tells you a lot about the guy with how he responds. And so if this is a deal breaker and he gets all fussy and particular and calls you a diva for this kind of thing, he's probably not going to be a great match on a lot of other things. And so I found mostly that when I would declare this sort of thing ahead of time, and you don't even really have to do it ahead of time. I mean, I guess that has some bearing on the restaurant of choice. But they would go to great lengths to try to accommodate and would feel, if anything, sort of bad that they weren't eating the way I was eating. And it was like, no, it's not about you. I'm just sort of really unusual. This is just one of my weird quirks. I'm just a quirky girl. And too bad. You just let him deal. I get very disagreeable on this topic. Doug's like, yeah, she does.
Totally reasonable. No, it's totally reasonable. You're in if you're getting 3 dates a week, you obviously are a very attractive person. You're in a position of power. Use it. John Wooden used to say when he was trying to tell coaches, hey, you've got a bench, use it. You got some star player that's being a pain in the ass, put him on the bench. Okay. So you have a tool, and that tool is that if you are sufficiently attractive to a given guy that you are interested in, and you're interesting enough to be a serious pair bond player for him, you've got a tremendous amount of power. So in no way do you need to back off and fiddle around and be deceptive or anything else. No, exactly. I concur 100% with Jen. Go straight at it, relaxed and in a pleasant fashion, and forget about it. This is no issue. Just do it your way.
Yeah. Do you think that people that are vegan, especially for ethical reasons and non-vegans, ever make an ultimate love match? Because the reason I'm asking is because you see the questions in our group that I ask later on where there's so much dissension because of differing way of eating.
Not sure. Say your question again, AJ.
Well, when some people become vegan for different reasons, now there's often environmental reasons or health reasons, but back in the day, it was really, we're vegan for ethical reasons. That was the only thing we knew about. And in the group that I run that you often speak in, we see so much dissension in marriages for people that eat differently and they wish that their spouse would eat differently. And I'm just wondering, can a mixed marriage like that ultimately be successful?
Oh yeah, I think
that's difficult. Like, I mean, go ahead, Doug.
Yeah, there's no. This is not a central issue. The central issue is the nature of the personalities. So one of the things that that Jen and I have come to realize, I think, is actually a revolutionary idea in psychology. I don't believe that I've ever seen anybody write about this, but we are and will, and that is. The fact that personalities are genetic is known. So that's widely known among elite people in behavior genetics, and we try to share that here. So you're not changing your child's personalities by, whether or not you're drinking in front of them, or whether or not, you yell at them, or whether or not there's bad kids in the neighborhood or anything else. Turns out that, things are pleasant and unpleasant in your development, but it's not influencing your personality. So when two people meet and there's a romantic process, those two people are genetically fixed. Their personalities were genetically fixed at conception, okay? And so 32 years later, they're still genetically fixed. The people will talk about how, oh no, I changed over time. No, actually your circumstances changed. You didn't change particularly. So that's a longer discussion about how modifiable humans are, but their personalities are actually not modifiable. So therefore, it's going to turn out that a relationship between two people is genetically determined. Okay, now that is a new idea. So in fact, the relationship is genetic. Okay, so now we get to the heart of the issue. So the relationship and its dynamics are not about issues like whether you eat animal food or don't eat animal food. It's about the dynamics between the two individual personalities. And so if you have a personality that is unyielding on that issue, in other words, they feel so strongly and the other person absolutely doesn't, and they don't find the other person sufficiently interesting or valuable or attractive in order to in order to accommodate, go through some moderately uncomfortable accommodations, then you have an inherently conflicted situation. So I wouldn't actually, and to everybody's different. It would not bother me to live with somebody who ate animal food. Wouldn't, I mean, it wouldn't. It doesn't hit me in the same way that it probably hits Jen. I know Jen's got a bigger animal rights ethical chip than I do. It isn't that I'm not concerned and sensitive to animal rights issues. I just don't have the same level of militancy. That's an individual, personal, genetic phenomenon. Okay, and so as a result, wouldn't be any problem. Okay, so if a person had a problem with me and doing what I was doing, they're absolutely going to be ruled out, just because what I'm doing is totally rational, sensible. It's integrating what it is that I think is valuable for my own personal best interest, you know. And if they don't want to do that, or they have different standards, in other words, it's not whether you're this way or that way. It's always a matter of a continuum. Okay, there's a few people that are anchoring down the 99 plus percentile on the healthy living continuum, but actually the vast majority of people that I know are anchoring down the top 10%. That's what they do when they're serious and they care about this and it means a lot to them. They're in the top 10 percentile. That's what they are. They're not absolutists. Okay, there are a few people, but they're rare. They're rare individuals, and I wouldn't even dream of trying to find a life partner among one of those rare individuals. That would be a ludicrous. I'm not one of those rare individuals. So as a result, all I'm trying to do is to find someone that finds me interesting and is respectful of that. And I will, if I find them sufficiently interesting, this is not a deal-breaking thing for me, but it might be for somebody else. Why? Genetic. Okay. So if people are finding a conflict in their relationship, 16 years later, when Mary Bell figures out that she's an ethical vegan and Jimmy is not, and now they're butting heads, they're not butting heads over this issue. They're butting heads over inherent personality conflicts that exist in the relationship per se. So that's what this conflict literally, as John Wooden says, the game doesn't build character, it reveals it. Mm. That's how that goes.
So then if somebody is an ethical vegan, they should maybe just date vegans, because then they won't have this situation.
Say that again?
If somebody truly was like a Linda Middlesworth, then they should probably just date vegans so they don't have to deal with this.
Right, because probably Linda is not someone who has the same kind of natural flexibility on this issue that I do. And I don't know that Jen does. I think Jen's—
I don't. Total deal breaker for me. And so another genetic piece of the game here too is that for me a lot of it is disgust. It's sort of I'm motivated by ethics, and so if somebody motivated by health too, but it's mostly rooted in ethics, and I'm not having anything to do with eating animals. And if somebody's eating animals around me, we have a real kind of moral, ethical difference in our approaches, like what we value. Same reason I would have trouble dating someone with wildly different politics or wildly different hobbies. It's just you're not on the same page with what's important in life. But the other big piece is that women are much more beholden to feelings of disgust for really valid reasons throughout evolution. We're much more susceptible to infection. We're much more susceptible to infection during certain phases of our cycle. So you can present us with the same disgusting phenomenon at different points in our cycle, and we'll be more disgusted in our luteal phase than our follicular phase. And so it can be much more of a deal breaker for women than it is for men. And I think that's pretty common. If you have a deep aversion to a certain type of eating, you can't cohabitate with that type of eating. Fair enough. It limits your pool, and that kind of sucks, and it makes a difficult process even more difficult, but not impossible.
Right. I remember I met Charles over 30 years ago, and I had already been vegan for such a long time. And I said, if you want to eat meat, then you eat meat, but the house is vegan, the wedding's vegan, if there's kids, they're vegan. And, after a while, you know how guys are. It's just like they go, I mean, at least he did, because I'm making the food. What's he going to do? Break out the grill. So, but, Elizabeth, who's watching live, says, but being vegan, it's not easy to date. Any suggestions?
Hey, it's not easy to date, period. So
yeah.
This is not a, this is, actually being vegan is it could be an ethical flag, which is an important thing, and you can't run away from that, or it's a health conscientiousness flag, which is also fine. In other words, if you're, as Jen says, if you're leading with that, and we're leading with it, any cross-examination is about a hypothesis about health, health conscientiousness. And I can remember a couple of arguments I got into on a couple of dates, but I can tell you why, because I wasn't that interested anyway. So if I got cross-examined and then I started to share a little truth, and then I remember getting pushed back on that and thinking, you know what? I'd rather win the argument than get a second date. So that's how that went.
That tells you something very important about how that evening is going to go.
Yeah. But trust me, if I was more interested, I would have been a lot more flexible. So,
well, this is the key point for women in particular to understand. So let's put on our little evolutionary psychology hats. Like, if the guy is not willing to meet you where you are and accommodate you, it means he is not, in the language that we use, over rewarded by you. And you want that male to be over rewarded by you, i.e. he can't believe he's on a date with you. He's so excited about you. You've got a lot of room for error. You're not trying to prove your value to him in the same way that he's trying to prove it to you from an evolutionary perspective. So this is only going to be a successful, stable pair bond from the beginning if he's really, really, really excited to be on that date. And that means he's going to have more, just like you would, if you were in that situation, you would move closer to, what you perceived as his demands of your behavior. So if he's not showing any willingness to accommodate you and to say, okay, do whatever you want to do, I'm not going to be shitty about it, then you're signing up for a world of hurt with this relationship, and it's probably not going to be a stable pair bond in the long term.
Right. A lot of people are commenting in the chat how they find it's not appealing or even disgusting kissing somebody that eats meat.
Yeah, meat mouth. Yeah. Yeah, total deal breaker for me. And it really sucks to be a deal breaker. But it is what it is. And if that's the situation, then just accept it and accept that your pool has been limited, and that's how life is. Most people have some sort of deal breaker that limits their pool. So this is what yours is.
Nice. Well, here's kind of a fun question. I've always wondered this myself, especially living in LA my whole life, being exposed to this. It's from Rose, and she said, I've always despised my birth name. My parents gave me a bizarre and made up name that was impossible to spell and even more impossible to pronounce. At 18, when I became an adult, I had it legally changed to Rose. Why do parents torture their offspring like this?
Narcissism.
True. Yeah, the just some grandstanding on the part of the parent. It wouldn't have to be narcissism. It could also just be weirdness in some way. So I have a friend who was given an acronym for a name, and it was a very interesting one. And really smart guy, neat guy. His dad was a smart guy, but definitely Asperger's like. And so behind that, we got Barwick. Back your reason with equal courage.
Oh, Christ. I wouldn't name a cat that.
Yes, there you go. So
yeah, I mean, my parents, I mean, my sort of hippie birth name is Guinevere. I've got this crazy hippie name, and it's not because they were narcissists. It's because they had, really just particular circuits that were enchanted by certain mythological tales, and it was his personality. But when you're purposefully giving your child some kind of inscrutable name that everybody for the rest of their life is going to screw up, and it's not rooted in some kind of real strong interest or religion, or there's no good reason for it, then you're just looking at the parent trying to feel more important because people are going to have to ask them about the name a lot.
Interesting. Cool. Thank you. So this is from Natalie. What would be the most effective way to help our smart, beautiful, headstrong 28-year-old daughter deal with her eating disorder? It's heartbreaking to watch this, and we want to support her in the best way we can. She has a BMI of 15. She feels amazing and is able to work efficiently and says she is thinking clearly and has never felt better. She only drinks lots and lots of fruit juice, eats fruit and a little salad, and claims anything else makes her feel tired and slows her down. When she cooks for her husband, she will taste the food, but discreetly spits it out. What is our best approach? Or do you have plant-based eating disorders professionals you can recommend? Many thanks for your guidance.
For this question, I would recommend either talking to me or Jen. And so there's some definite logic that can be super interesting for people to learn. If they don't want to talk to us because they don't like the plant-based this and that dance, they want to talk to Dr. Shan Geisinger. That's Guisinger. And she's a woman super knowledgeable in eating disorders. We have great respect for Shan and her work. We think it's path-breaking and pioneering. However, I think that you can improve upon what she does by integrating it with really healthy nutrition, which, you know, can't know everything, and Shan's not knowledgeable in the McDougall, Goldhammer, Furman, Esselstyn, Campbell genre. So she doesn't know about that stuff. So, but she absolutely knows the psychology of this. So if the daughter is not into plant-based nutrition and finds that already offensive and intrusive, then I would send her to Shan Geisinger's website and have her look at it, because the reasons for that anorexia are fascinating, and so we'll leave it there. If it was binge eating, I would send her to Justina Fries, who's going to be on.
Who's on with AJ on Saturday?
Saturday, Justina's on the show Saturday.
So anyway, but that's how I think that's about right. We would want her. We want to see whether or not if you're the parent there, you could read Shan Geisinger's work on her website, and then don't push it hard. Don't sell these things too hard. You suggest to your daughter, this looks kind of interesting. I thought you might be worth a few minutes of your time to look at it. Okay, try to gently put it under people's nose. You don't try to jump up and down. Okay, but Shan Geisinger, I believe, has diagnosed the underlying roots of anorexia, and so the girl is in a trap. It's a very fascinating and incredible trap, and once you see it, it can be helpful for people once they understand what the trap is. It can be helpful to steel their courage to move against what is in fact a fascinating and self-destructive instinct.
I went to the website and I see, are the biological changes of anorexia adaptations or dysfunctions?
Yeah. You'll probably hear some about this from Justina maybe this weekend. But yeah, these are adaptive mechanisms, and so anorexia nervosa is the tripping of an adaptive mechanism, which is a revolutionary idea. It's clearly accurate, and this is a completely different thinking than you're going to see anywhere in anorexia treatment. So some anorexia treatment works without knowing why it works, which often happens. So in the history of science and engineering, people figure out, oh, could they just do things? And sometimes it works and they have no idea why. The immunology, for God's sakes. So anyway, but this is now a better understanding of the mechanics of why this problem exists is there. And I think it will be helpful even for the parents to understand what situation the daughter's actually in.
Great, thank you. Maybe I can interview her sometime. I know that this particular individual is an ethical vegan, so that's kind of interesting. Thank you. And I know the lady that wrote the question knows both of you and likes you very much, but wasn't sure if that was your terrain, so thanks. Great. Okay, this is a funny one from Barry. A company keeps making mistakes with my reward points. I've already redeemed them, and I've called them and emailed them several times to tell them it's a mistake, but they don't rectify it. Should I just spend the points? I'm highly conscientious and afraid I'd feel guilty.
Oh, they gave you extra points.
Yeah.
Yeah, just spend the points.
Yeah, there's a way, you know, in the Monopoly game, the famous card is bank error in your favor, collect $200. That's not going to happen because they've got computer situations. So the nobody, you know, they might have miscounted it in the old days at the window, but that's not going to happen. The however, you have to understand that there is a limited amount of accuracy in the world's processes, and so there is an inherent degree of error. And so you're going to occasionally be on the winning side. You're going to be occasionally on the losing side of these sorts of things. So when you're ever on the winning side, if it was a little person with their little store, I would definitely return it and
Totally.
and it out. But if it's, you know, Costco, different story.
Particularly now that he's done his due diligence, he tried, you know, it's
Yes,
yeah, no, I don't see I would beat your genes by overcoming your intense conscientiousness here and just chalk it up to earning some good karma somewhere along the way.
Nice. I know that when a bank makes a mistake though, and they do find it, they make you pay it back.
Yeah, and so that might be part of the concern. I think that's unlikely to happen, and even if it is, then you've got a really good case that it's like, well, I tried. Like, what do you want from me?
Absolutely.
I don't think they're going to extort cash from you in the afterwards.
I've actually, probably in the last 20 years, I've probably been involved in maybe 5 exchanges where there was an error in the change, where I was benefiting, and or even when it was wrong the other way, that it was trivial. And so a few times, you know, in my early life, I would point this out. And finally, at some point, by the time I was about 40, it's like, you know what? They're not actually happy about me pointing it out.
Yeah.
Like i.e., hey, stupid, you gave me $1 too much. It's like, so now I just forget it.
This is the Instacart rule. So if you order from Instacart or grocery delivery, you know, some percentage of the time they screw up your order. You know, they like, where are my apples? My apples aren't in the, like, you charged me for them. But then some percentage of the time you get a bonus. They just give you something that you didn't order, or they don't charge you for something that they wound up getting that was on your list. And so it all seems to balance out in the grand calculus of the universe. And so it's a long game.
There you go.
You know, about 20 years ago, I found $300, 3 $100 bills on a street where I was a professional dog walker. And I was really elated because I was really needing money at that time, but I felt so guilty. I literally knocked on every single door. I didn't say, did you lose $300 cash? But I said, did you lose something significant? And if so, what it was? You know, what was it? And nobody did. So I felt okay taking it.
There you go.
Yeah,
But I had to knock on every single door on that one street because I kept thinking, well, what if it was the gardener and he couldn't pay his rent? And
See, my first impulse, if I found that much money on the sidewalk, was that I was being secretly filmed by some social psychology grad student trying to figure out what I was going to do.
That is so funny.
There you go.
Yeah.
This is a little controversial, so if you don't want to answer it, don't. But it'd be interesting to hear your answer. This is from Coach Bill. Dear doctors, do you feel that it's fair for transgender women to compete in women's athletics? If so, then is it no longer women's athletics? I'm a retired college tennis coach, and I'm so glad I don't have to deal with this.
No, I don't think it's fair. In other words, I don't think, if by that we mean a person who was male and now gets transformed biologically and is now female, competing in females athletics, no, it's absolutely unfair. It's ridiculous. And it should absolutely be banned. It's the male has a completely different physiology and capability of females, and the bell curves certainly overlap. You know, I wouldn't even want to play basketball against Serena Williams. She'd back me down in the paint, dunk over me. Apparently the girl can dunk. So you know that there's a bell curve overlap. Okay, and so the fastest woman in the world would not finish in the top 50 the NCAA Division I, trials for males, much less the Olympic Games, for God's sakes. So this is absurd to have girls who are competitive and desirous of winning distinction, and they want to have competition with each other, and they have their own hierarchy. Okay, and so we're not going to blend this into one hierarchy. That is ridiculous. And so I think it's absurd that this is going on, and I think they should put a stop to it immediately. It's going to be interesting. It's a problem with the political correctness and whether or not anybody has the guts, and judges have the guts to step into this. They should, though. This is a very clear-cut issue as far as I'm concerned, and it ought to be settled.
I mostly agree with the sort of essence of that, but I think there are a million legal battles to be had around the edges of it, because there are many degrees of what constitutes a transgender female, and so there's sort of a self-identified high school boy who decides at age 16 that he identifies as a female after going through puberty and going through the whole process, and is kind of re-identifying as female in a strategic sort of way, or what could be a strategic sort of way, versus kids that have different, there are many different, I'm not an expert in the biology of this, but everything from intersex to kids that go on puberty blockers early, who have put themselves at some sort of larger disadvantage that a regular biological male would have. So there's nuance, and this will all be sorted out with a lot of legal battles. It's going to be a mess. It's going to be in courts for a long time. I don't think it's a total cut and dried issue, because gender is no longer a straightforward cut and dried issue in any regard. So very complex.
I wish they would teach like this all new stuff for dummies class, because I'm in classes now in LA through Zoom, and when people like were asking me what my pronouns were, and I'm like, I don't know, this has never been taught to us old people,
Yeah, it's the goalposts move every day. I saw something instructing me today that not only do you need to know if you're in a teaching position, sort of what pronouns somebody prefers to be called. This has been sort of the direction things have been going for a long time, but it's very important to not misuse their pronouns depending on the context in which you're using them. So the individual may have a pronoun preference in the classroom, but it's not okay to use those pronouns if you call that individual at home, because they may not use them at home, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So this becomes almost impossible for people to navigate, and at some point, I think the pendulum of sanity will turn to some degree, but we're living in very interesting times with this issue.
Maybe we should just call people by their name, unless their name was one of those weird ones that their parents made up. All right, this I don't think we've ever had, at least knowingly, a teenager write in, and this is a very poignant one, so it has to be anonymous. I am 14 years old, so I don't know if it would be possible to have a private session with either of you. So I'm hoping Chef AJ will ask this question on my behalf. In the fall, I will be going to a private school where the parents are asked to volunteer in the classroom one day a month. I am freaking out because I am embarrassed by my mother, as she is morbidly obese. I never have friends over and always meet them other places. I have learned from watching you that it is genetic, not her fault, but it is unlikely that she'll ever be able to do anything about this. She is a good person and a good mother, and I've never expressed how I felt to anyone before, and I feel ashamed that I even feel this way, but I do, and I don't know what to do about the guilt. I also live in fear knowing my genetic potential, that I could end up like her, and I'm afraid I'll develop an eating disorder. No one seems to talk about the effect that obesity has on family members, so I was hoping you could address this. Are my feelings normal, or am I just a terrible kid?
Oh, well, you're not a terrible kid. No. Doug, you've talked about this a little bit before, and I've heard recent shows even with AJ, so I know you have some.
About this. This is an interesting problem. So where the central conflict is between, I assume I can't tell whether it's a boy or a girl.
It's a girl, unless the name was one of those, it's a girl.
Several comments I would make. First of all, the person's weight is highly predictable by their genetics, but it's not determined by their genetics. So there's a difference. So So you, no matter what your genetics are, your future is not cast in stone. It's actually under your control. It's just that if you have the genetics to be obese in the modern food environment, then you're going to have to not live in the modern food environment, and then you're going to be okay. Okay, so let's get that out of the way first. Now, so the conflict here, there's the conflict is really that this girl has got a situation that's going to be dicey for her to manage. She's under a lot of tension here. She would like her mother, she'd like to conceal her mother because her mother is a social liability. Okay. Now, so what we have is we've got a conflict between the girl and her mom. And she sounds like her mom is a very nice person. And so it's not like the two of them are inherently conflicted. This is a very interesting problem and a super fascinating one for a teenager, a young person to be writing to us about. What we would want to do in principle is we would want to look at different solutions that that are in front of us. So one of those solutions is to raise the issue with your mom. Okay, one of those solutions would be to ask your mom to have a session with either Jen or I where you could be a part of it. Okay, so you wouldn't have to tell your mom what it was about. You could bring it up in a session with with someone who's wise about counseling, and it could be therefore we can help facilitate that conversation and to sort of think that through. Okay, so that's there's that one option is that your mom shows up or that your mom either shows up or she doesn't show up. So we don't get the option of her showing up 10% and then find out. In other words, we're going to either have it be 100% or zero. So unfortunately, this is not one of these things that we can do matters of degree. What we can do though is that we can have the conversation with your mom. That is a legitimate process, and the truth is that your mom almost certainly, unless she is completely clueless, which is exceedingly unlikely, your mom is very much aware of this. Okay, and so she's aware that she is a social liability to you on the basis of her appearance. We don't know how concerned she is about it. Probably pretty concerned about it. And so as a result, this isn't going to be some shock out of left field to have this discussion. Now, in that discussion, you will learn some things about your mom. In other words, you'll learn about how she sees it, how hurt or embarrassed she is about this existing situation. And we can essentially have, between the two of you and a third party, a sort of problem-solving discussion about this. And the good news is that we're not under serious time pressure, because if it's I guess the parents, they volunteer once a month, so it's actually, so it's going to be happening pretty soon this fall. So we've got some time between now and then to sort of have this discussion and sort of get this issue out on the table. And so therefore, there's a sort of shock value. I don't think your mom would be shocked about this. I think she's probably worried about it herself, and likely is, and doesn't know what to do herself about this. And so we would have essentially a problem-solving session where we look through all angles of this, and a big part of the problem here is the tension that's inside you about expressing this. That's an internal tension where you have guilt associated with it, you have frustration with it, you feel sad behind it. There's a whole constellation of feelings as you also are, would very much like her to not be there to conceal her, at least in the early going, so when you're in a brand new school. And so you're sort of not wanting to have this social liability right in front, right front and center. all of these things are sort of part and parcel of this discussion. And, it's, and we would have to, we can't know what the right solution is until we hear from all parties and all parties express where it is that they're out at, and we kind of walk our way through all in our imaginations, all the ramifications. So that's what we do when we have a hard problem. But it's a wonderful, thoughtful, and important question in your life. And so I'm glad that you wrote to us for help. We normally would not ever talk to somebody. We don't accept people that are under 18 for counseling, but we would accept somebody under 18 with a parent.
If you let us know. Yeah.
Yeah. In other words,
yeah.
So let us know about that, and then we'll go from there.
Yeah, I would just, that's all great. And I think it's, facilitating a really complicated and difficult conversation is at the heart of the answer to this question, if there is an answer. I would also just give the context that being embarrassed of our parents is a time-honored tradition.
Sure.
And you may feel a little bit differently once you get into the school year and you see the other parents, and you realize that maybe you're not as much of a social pariah as you kind of anticipate that you're going to be, and other kids are going to be embarrassed of their parents for their own reasons. Some of them are going to be because they're also overweight. Some of them are going to be because I was mortified when I was 14 because my father came in during homecoming week and completely cornered my beloved freshman English teacher with regaling her of embarrassing stories of his obsession with Russia. He'd been traveling to Russia, and I cowered in the corner and just couldn't believe how aggressive he was and how he wouldn't shut up and how she was my favorite teacher and I wanted to show her off and I wanted him to see how proud she was of me and all of these things. And so there are lots of things to be embarrassed about with your parents, and all of your peers are going to have similar issues. And you may just naturally calibrate as you observe that you're not at the bottom of the pecking order. It may be a more acceptable. So if you can kind of put it off for a month until you get a little bit of a sense of the where you fit in, and then have the conversation grounded in a little more of that data of what your situation looks like, that could be a good way to approach it too.
Absolutely.
I don't know what kids are like today, but my mom was morbidly obese and I got teased a lot because of it, and it wasn't fun. So I feel for this person. So maybe she'll make a session. Thanks.
Yeah.
This one's about social norms. And I've actually asked Dr. Lau once a similar question. I know how he feels, but this has a little bit of a twist on this one from Anne Marie. I have a friend who gave me a thoughtful gift, a lovely scented candle. I was highly allergic to it, so I regifted it. But of course, I said thank you. And now she has followed up that gift with more products with that scent, to which I am also allergic. She is coming to visit, and she's going to see that I don't have any of the candles or room fresheners or products anywhere. I wish I had told her the truth at the beginning. So what is the best course of action now? And in general, if someone gives you a gift that you are allergic to?
How
Oh
classic
man.
this.
Oh man, that sucks. That's right up there with like, you don't know the person's name and it's too late to ask.
Right. Right.
I think you've got to fess up. I mean, if she's coming into your home and she actually asks about it, which would be a little bit rude, she may not say anything. Yeah, but I think this becomes sort of a, I really didn't want to say anything and I just wasn't sure how to handle this. And I feel terrible about it and it's been keeping me up at night, but I just have to tell you that the scent really bothers me and I'm allergic to it. And I never felt like I could be honest with you. And now here I am, and just kind of vomit your truth. And hopefully she's a good enough friend that she can be resilient to this hiccup in your friendship. And if she's not, again, this goes back to kind of the first question, like if that's a deal breaker and your friend turns into a total bitch because you don't have her stinky candles around, like what kind of friend is that? It's sort of like this, what's the friendship really based on at that point?
Would it have been better if she just said it right away that this was such a thoughtful gift? I love it, but I'm allergic to it. Would have been better?
Probably, all things equal, but most of us have been in that situation where you run the CB in that moment in your cost benefit analysis, and you don't think you're you're never going to have to pay the piper for a little social white lie. Like you just say thank you, and you never think, oh, I'm going to be this is going to be infected in my future. My gratitude for this gift is now going to set the bar for every recurring gift that I'm going to get from this person. And then they're going to come check up on it in a couple of years. You're not thinking in that sort of way at that time. So it's perfectly rational in the moment to be, oh, thank you is beautiful. And pretty soon you've dug yourself into a hole that's really hard to get out of. But I think most friends would understand. If you were in that situation, if it were your friend, you would understand. So if she doesn't, then Houston, we have a problem. I don't know, maybe Doug has a different approach. Doug's more finesses these things more than I do sometimes. He'd say, oh, we're exterminating the house, so we have to meet somewhere else.
That's good. That's good,
yeah,
Jen.
that's an
That
option.
took me a week to come up with that, but I'd eventually get there.
For some unforeseen reason, I really wish we could hang out at my house, but it's not habitable at the moment. So, oh well.
Who knows? No, that all sounds fine. I probably would have put a stop to it after the second gift.
Yeah.
First gift, I wouldn't have said anything. The second one.
Once it's a trend. Yeah.
Once it's a trend, maybe I would have waited for 3. I probably would. Knowing myself, who sends you gifts? I mean, I get gifts from AJ. I get cool t-shirts. But Jen, you never got me anything.
Yes, I have.
See, this is the truth, people, is that who keeps track anyway? Certainly not me.
I'll never forget when my first book on process came out in 2011. Linda Middlesworth wanted copies for all of her children, and 2 of them aren't vegan. And so I signed the book, and then I was at TrueNorth, and somebody asked me to sign a copy of my book. And I always sign it on a particular page. And it was a book I had signed to Linda's son, the same one. He had stolen it. So you can guess who called that person up right away. See, because I would be like the candle giving friend,
All right, fair enough.
I would bust the person. Okay, here we go. Nicole says, does thought always precede feelings? If so, how do you account for situations where you get sad or even cry when watching a sad movie or hearing a sad song? I'm not really thinking about anything at the time.
Yeah, let me explain. So the way the mind works is you have, I'll try to not drag this out too far. What happens is that if you've got your senses are a way to try to help you orient you towards opportunities and threats in the environment. And so what there is that there's a continuum of value. So there's something up here that is the most valuable thing in the environment, and there's something down here that is the most dangerous thing. And so the things that are in the middle are things that are neutral, they're value neutral, they're neither going to help you nor they're going to harm you. So your feelings are going to be derivatives, or they're derived from your ability of your mind to recognize the inputs on a continuum of value. So if you're listening to a sad song, so the concept there where people are a little bit can get confused is if they read the ideas, for example, that come from cognitive therapy or some simplistic psychology, Psych 101 text that's trying to keep it overly simple. So there's always been an argument in the literature, are like thoughts primary or feelings primary, and so there's been arguments between Bob Science and George Mandler and emotion theorists forever about this. I'll go all the way back to William James. Okay, so the first great American psychologist. Okay, so wasn't he at Harvard, Jen? I think he was. Anyway,
can't get it all right. Yeah.
Yeah. But the point is that your feelings are definitely preceded by something that you would call thought, but not conscious thought. So the thought that we're talking about are very deep, wordless algorithms that evaluate stimuli. Okay, so you could walk by a bookstore and look in the window, and then start walking down the street, and then suddenly you're feeling a little maudlin, okay? And to the best of your knowledge, you're not thinking about anything. But what's happening is that, oh, I don't know, there's something about that process that is activating a feeling of, oh, the days of the bookstore are gone, and I remember when it used to be really cool to go in there. In other words, it's calling up a bunch of memories, and that they haven't even hardly arrived in consciousness yet. But what's activated a bunch of activated feelings is an analysis that our environment, in a feature of the environment, has reminded us that our overall environment has changed, and from your perspective, for the worse. And part of that could also then activate, the feeling. It's essentially the feeling that you get in listening to Don McLean's American Pie. It's the story of a passing of an age, okay? And you could get that just by looking in a bookstore and seeing the people walking around, and it's not like the people before. In other words, they're not sitting in a little corner. It doesn't look the same. It doesn't look like the little shop around the corner. And so you can see that maybe doesn't look that successful. And so then your mind is drifting to the fact that Amazon has changed that space, and all of that passes by, and you have no idea why you're feeling maudlin, but you are, okay? But so the feeling did not come first, because a feeling can't come out of nowhere. A feeling is a reaction to an analysis of a value judgment. So it has to be on some continuum. So not only are direct sensory information on a continuum, so you look at something that looks beautiful, or you smell something that smells beautiful. How can you smell something that smells scrumptious and not have a feeling? Okay, so the reason why it's scrumptious, remember why it smells scrumptious. It isn't because it just smells scrumptious. It's because there are molecules in the air of high density calories. Okay, and those high density calories are being registered by deep, wordless value judgment algorithms to tell you that that's valuable food. Okay, that's why you're having that reaction. So all of your feelings are derived from value judgments. Tracing what is causing those value judgments to be activated in your mind can sometimes be very tricky. In fact, it can be so complicated that basically psychoanalysis gets it wrong almost all the time. In other words, they're thinking the reason you're having a bunch of feelings is all kinds of cockamamie stuff. In speaking, for example, of our anorexia problem earlier, one of the most outstanding articles I've ever read in the American Psychologist was by Shan Geisinger, who in that article takes to task the entire history of analysis of what the driving force is behind anorexia. And it shows all of the interesting 10% of the truth, cockamamie, confabulation crap that has come out of psychoanalytic thinking, and shows comically how absolutely, completely wrong it was. Okay, so that's an example of people trying really hard to figure out what's going on inside of the mind of an anorexic, and absolutely coming up empty. And the reason why they're coming up empty is that the wordless value judgment algorithms that are in the system are not necessarily designed to be arriving in consciousness. So you don't necessarily know why you feel what you feel, and you don't necessarily know why you're doing what you're doing. Okay, that's one of the great mysteries of romance, is that why two people can be, two possible partners can be objectively similar, but one of them you are far more drawn to than the other. And the reason is, you can name some things, but the truth is there's reasons that you can't even access. It's not accessible to consciousness. So that's a very long and somewhat academical answer to the question. And the answer is yes. There is a system of information processing and evaluation that always precedes feeling. there would be one exception to that. And that would be if someone would go into your head with an electrode and they would activate a neural circuit completely independent of the value judgment. They are activating the circuit sort of in an artificial fashion. That, you know, you can make that argument. But even then, the circuit that they are activating is a value judgment integrated circuit. And that's why it is that you even have that feeling. So that's how it works.
Thank you. Anything you want to say about that, Dr. Howk?
That was comprehensive and magisterial, so I have nothing to add.
Thank you. I love that adjective, magisterial. Oh, it's nice. Okay, so this is I like this question from Mark because he says, you always talk about eating a diet consistent with our species' natural history, but what exactly was that diet?
Whatever you could get.
Yeah.
I think there is no, this is one of the misnomers, like there's no natural history. I mean, natural diet of the species, because it really depended where you lived. It depended what time of year it was. It depended on what sort of, you know, things would go in phases of famine and feast. And so this really varied a lot. But usually when we're referring to this, we're just talking about a whole food diet, an unadulterated whole food diet. You're not processing things. You're not dehydrating things. You're not adding salt and oil and sugar and spices and balsamic reductions to things. You're just eating whole food as close to its actual whole form as you can get it. And the natural diet of the species included, you know, animal food when we could get it. We couldn't get much of it. We were mostly eating leafy plants and occasional sad little tubers that we could root out of the ground. And that's what it was. And when we could get some animal food, we were pretty excited about it. And it was short term, and it really drove our sharing impulse as social creatures. But yeah, it's not too complicated, but it's very variant depending on particular geographical constraints, I think.
But it definitely wasn't processed food, and it definitely wasn't processed animal products.
No, nobody, I mean, there's no way that anybody could have had access to those things. So yeah. And even, you know, eating a contemporary whole food plant-based diet, like many of us do, SOS free, you're mixing so many different things that you're mixing flavors and textures and foods that are coming from different regions of the world and grown in different seasons and under very different climate conditions that you would never have been able to put together in an ancestral diet. So if you really want to eat ancestrally, you're eating a very bland, you're really struggling to put together some twigs and berries and the occasional shriveled little potato when you're really
like a TrueNorth diet.
Yeah. And you're not getting any of it in great abundance. And so when people kind of hit a plateau or they get stuck with a whole food plant-based diet, you have to keep in mind that, you know, even the ancestral diet of the species is still not including rice and sauteed vegetables together at the same time. Like we can keep moving the line of what constitutes supernormal really, really far out. So, yeah.
I understand you correctly. There were no air fryers in the Stone Age.
So I'm told. According to our best anthropologist, that seems to be the conclusion. Yeah.
Yet Fred Flintstone managed to sustain obesity. Go figure. All right.
Yeah. Well, he had many resources, a lot of mate value.
It was those brontosaurus burgers. I think
all the emotional labor of the women around him too.
It's interesting because they had hairdressers in the Flintstones too. But anyways, that was my favorite show growing up. So Susan says, question for Dr. Lisle and Dr. Howk. I'm curious if personality differences are related to physiological differences in brain structures.
I would say the following is true. It almost certainly is true. The question is what those are, and we know something about that. So just in the same way that the physical differences between people, the structure of your face is and what your face looks like is as a result of physiological differences. So the genes code for proteins, and the proteins are the three-dimensional particles that wind up building you. And so that's going to be true for the neurons that get built, and then the nature of the neurons and the nature of their internal chemistry and how they work and their natural sensitivity. These things are going to be gene variances. So it's going to turn out that each gene that is responsible for building something in your brain, there's an alternative gene or a whole slew of them that are building a very, very similar structure in somebody else's brain. So for example, everybody has a desk, but somebody is built out of oak and somebody else is built out of walnut and somebody else is built out of elm trees. In other words, they're very similar in their function, but they're slightly chemically different. And so, yes, so what you're looking at in differences in personality is genetic. In other words, the genes are responsible. How the genes, the variation, I don't even know exactly what the word physiological even means precisely, but there are actually significant structural differences that are observable in people. In other words, you can actually see differences in people's brains, and the differences in the shape of the brain actually is correlated with some differences in how those people behave. So you can see it on a gross level, and we know that it's true on the microscopic level of how the genes are building these things, because we can see the huge contribution of genes to individual differences in personality. So yeah, the answer is yes. The question is exactly how that is done. We don't know, and it's actually so inherently complicated that it doesn't even matter. Every gene that has been found to be associated with a difference, for example, in extroversion. So if we find a gene that is very common at like that particular gene is doing something in the brain, God knows what it is. It's not as simple as, oh, it codes for more serotonin. No, that's not how it works. So so we've got one gene that's sort of an oak tree gene, and we've got another gene that is a walnut tree gene. And we find out that when the people have the oak gene, the oak version, that they're more extroverted than the people that have the walnut version. So now we might be saying, okay, well, now let's find out what that gene does. Well, I can tell you what that gene does. That gene does something that is responsible for about probably 1/10,000th of the variance in the differences between people. In other words, the differences between the people on that as a result of that specific gene are infinitesimally small. You have to have thousands and thousands of genes that slowly, like tiny little grains of sand that you're picking up. If you pick them up one at a time and put them in a little jar, it would take you forever to get a spoonful of sand. That's how we are finding genes and their impact on human personality. It's one grain of sand at a time. So, but we know, we can see sand, and we can tell when one sand is darker sand and one sand's lighter sand. It's like, well, you can hardly see it at the microscopic level, but when we pile them all up in a huge amount, we can actually see a difference. This is coarser sand, this is finer sand. Same thing is true of personality. When you can see, the differences in people, and we know that the reason for those differences are thousands and thousands of infinitesimally small differences, probably operating at different parts of neuron function. So, the amount of gating channels that are open for a specific neurotransmitter on a given neuron, how quickly they recycle a given neurotransmitter once a neuron is fired, all kinds of things. And so that is 1,000 years from now, in 10 centuries, they may actually be able to model something that looks pretty good about figuring out the neurotransmitter and individual brain differences from the gene to the personality. Long before that, right now, we can already see it, and we can already even tell, even very, very soon here in the next 10 years, we'll be able to tell from individual differences in genes on a printout. We're going to be able to tell how extroverted you are, how introverted you are, how intelligent you are, how conscientious you are, how open to experience you are. In other words, we're already going to be able to get the score and know what it is from your genes, but we have no idea how the genes are doing it. That will take 1,000 years. Okay. So I hope that's a Does that make sense, Jen? How's that sound?
Yeah, it might not take 1,000 years because of AI. So the latest thing that's blown my tiny brain is the I can't remember if I told you about this, but Google inadvertently, while training algorithms to discover early markers of heart disease in retinal scans, they inadvertently discovered that the machine could tell the difference. It could predict the gender of the retinal scan with incredible accuracy, 98%. Looking at a retinal scan that no human can look at that and determine, there's no prior for determining what gender they're looking at, but the AI algorithm can. And we don't know, Google doesn't know how it's doing it. It can't look in the black box of the algorithm and figure out what it sees that we can't see. And so it's like, this is how these things are progressing. So it's able to predict quite a bit about you, including your gender, including your proclivity to heart disease. And that's from a retinal scan. So we don't know, there are all kinds of physical correlations that we're not consciously picking up on. There's this whole literature of, people are very good at predicting big five by looking at faces much more than chance. So if you give people a series of faces and you ask them, is that person agreeable or disagreeable? Is that, which one's more likely to have this job or to have this characteristic? People are very good at making those inferences, and AI is even better at them with all kinds of, ethical and social implications from that. So this is a big, big opportunity to learn a lot about the species, but it all starts in the brain.
Wow, thank you. This has been great. Is there anything you want to promote, Dr. Howk? I know you have this wonderful virtual village. Do you want to tell people about it?
Oh, sure. Every weekend right now, it's happening when is it happening right now? Saturday afternoons throughout June. I have something called the Virtual Village, which is just a group of whoever wants to drop in. You can join for a week, or you can join indefinitely through my Patreon page, which is just patreon.com/Dr. Jen. And so the Virtual Village is just, it's kind of like a half, I don't know, it's part group therapy, part Q&A, part just, it's designed to be like a group of people sitting around a Stone Age fire, just shooting the shit and catching up and asking questions and learning about life and each other. And it's been a really, really great group. And we talk about all kinds of weird things. AJ drops in from time to time when she can, and you just kind of never know how scandalous it's going to get. Anything goes in that group. So people are welcome to join.
Great, thank you so much. Dr. Lisle, any parting words or anything you'd like to promote?
No, I don't think so. I think we're good. I think people know about the Living Wisdom Library on our website, Esteem Dynamics, and they know otherwise about us. But hey, this is our favorite place to come talk, AJ.
Well, it's my favorite. Thank you. And people are still waiting for the May 28th Q&A to be put up.
I know, I've gotten several emails. I just sent out an email to the group that there's apparently some kind of upload problem and we had to re-upload it, and now it's getting posted imminently.
Great. Well, thank you guys. We really appreciate you coming on and answering these somewhat difficult questions at times, and we look forward to having you on the show as soon as possible. Thanks so much.
It's always great to be here.
Thank you. And thanks all of you for watching another episode of Chef AJ Live. Please come back tomorrow when my guest is Stacy Heine, and she's going to be making hash brown veggie cups that were not available in the Stone Age. Take care, guys. Bye-bye.
See you soon.
Bye.